Hello and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Please sign up at my Patreon to get episodes earlier, bonuses, to have a say on future content, and to interact with me and other Warbirders directly. But mainly you'll have the satisfaction of helping keep this podcast going. You can also toss me a tip via PayPal at WOWB17, or even just drop me a review. Thank you for your support. Now on to the show. Hello, Warbirders. So I didn't get too many comments, well, either good or bad, on the Halloween episode, so I'm just kind of wondering, do you not like that kind of thing? If you don't like it, then I'll drop it for next year. But just let me know in the comments. But right now, I'd like to welcome on board username Not an Egg, whose real name is Isaac Sleep, I think. Although I'd love to know the story behind that username. Also, it's great to have Ivan on board. We've had some great email convos, and he promises to help me out with future Russian terms. Also, Julian Castro, D. Wiseman, and Quinn Clark. Thank you so much for coming on board and helping to support the podcast. So today's episode comes from a request from Michael, who also goes by GoalieDad73. So we've looked at aircraft that were dead ends before. You know, planes that just didn't pan out to their expectations. Good examples would be my Doomed Fledglings series. That was the XP-55 Ascender, the Vultee XP-54 Swoosh Goose, the Northrop XP-56 Black Bullet, the Lockheed XP-49 and XP-58 Chain Lightning, and finally the McDonnell XP-67 Moonbat. All fascinating planes that just didn't work out. But I'm not sure that we've ever looked at a whole concept that failed. I don't even think that my glider series counts because the use of gliders did work during World War II. It just didn't last beyond the Second World War. But the turret fighter concept, you may not have even heard about it, which gives a good indication of how successful or not successful it was. How did it come about, and what happened? So let's dive in. So the interwar years had a lot of assumptions about future conflicts. You can hear about these in my Big Bombers episode. But the main idea was that the big, well-armed, and fast bombers would settle conflicts by flying right over the front lines and hitting the enemy's cities. With the enemy's munitions factories and population morale crushed, the only thing that was needed was a pen to sign the surrender documents. You don't need escort fighters because they're too slow, too weak, and don't even have the range to keep up with or even go with the bombers. Everyone is saying that the bomber will get through anyway, so why bother with dumb fighters? This was the state-of-the-art thinking in the mid-1930s. So if that is what you think is going to happen, then the British turret fighter concept doesn't sound so weird. So the British believed that they would not have to be dealing with enemy fighters over their home island, because the enemy bombers would be well armed enough to fight their way in, and the unneeded fighters wouldn't even have the range to operate over the home island either. So, what would be needed to deal with these turret-armed enemy bombers was an interceptor that was equally well armed and able to fling a superior amount of lead at them. Forward-firing guns have always been a pain. In this podcast, we've talked about that a lot. In the nose, you have limited space and you have to deal with shooting through a propeller. Ways around that were fuselage-mounted guns, but those have to be deliberately slowed to fire between the propeller blades. Firing through the prop hub doesn't have to be slowed, but you have to either embed the gun in the engine, as in the BF-109, or put the engine in the back, like the Airacobra, or you fill the nose with guns and put the props and engines on the wings or in the rear in a pusher configuration. Or lastly, you just leave the nose for the engine and prop and put the guns in the wings. But then you have to set them up to fire inward slightly so that the bullet streams cross somewhere out in front. These are all inconvenient, but perhaps the most inconvenient thing of all is that the fighter always has to be pointed in the direction of fire. Just think about how hard that is. To fly, figure out the deflection of the shot, avoid getting hit by the defensive guns from the bombers, but fly straight at them in order to hit them yourself. It would also be so convenient to divide up the jobs of flying the plane and firing the guns. I mean, who could possibly do both of these things well at the same time? As I'm writing this, I feel like I'm convincing myself that fighters with forward-firing guns are actually the dumb idea. And the idea had already been tested. 59 Hawker Demon biplanes had been built by Boulton Paul under a subcontract. With the addition of a hydraulically powered 4-gun turret from the French SAM company, SAMM, which stands for Société d'Application des Machines Motrices, in 1935. The British Air Ministry liked the experiment, and so that very same year, in April 1935, the ministry issued specification F935, calling for a 2-seat fighter that could operate both by day and night. It was to reach about 290 miles per hour, that's 470 kilometers per hour, at 15,000 feet or 4,600 meters, and carry all of its armament in a single power-operated turret. The design was meant to be sleek and efficient, with performance only slightly below that of contemporary single-seat fighters, and enough fuel to maintain extended patrols. The turret itself was to provide wide tactical flexibility, capable of rotating through a full 360 degrees and firing at targets from multiple angles. And it's not like the manufacturers looked at this idea and thought it was crackers and didn't want to play. Boulton Paul, Bristol, Fairey, Gloucester, Hawker, Supermarine, and Vickers all started coming up with designs for turret fighters. Some dropped out, and some were rejected, and in the end only Boulton Paul and Hawker built prototypes. Boulton Paul's submission was known as the P-82. If you've never seen one, and can't look at Patreon right now, imagine a slightly stretched Hawker Hurricane with a 4-gun turret dropped in behind the cockpit. Very much like R2-D2 was placed in the X-Wing fighter in Star Wars. Actually, why didn't they give R2 some laser guns to fire back there? The new aircraft was powered by a single Rolls-Royce Merlin V12 engine, furnishing 1,030 horsepower and turning a 3-bladed prop. 104 imperial gallons, that's 470 liters of fuel, was carried within the wing center section. But as the concept was named, the aircraft was built around the turret. The powered dorsal turret was equipped with 4 303 Browning machine guns. In order to cut down on the drag of that big turret, the fuselage was fitted with aerodynamic fairings that automatically raised and lowered into the fuselage so that the turret could rotate freely and smoothed the airflow. The Type A turret system was pretty advanced for the time. It was hydraulically powered, but also had a manual crank in case of hydraulic failure. The 4 Brownings were aimed with a control column with a button on the top which electrically fired the guns. There were programmed insulated cutoff points that would prevent the guns from firing when they were pointed at the propeller disc or the tailplane. which is helpful for not shooting down your own plane. The turret could be operated in a normal or a high-speed mode for swift changes of direction. The gunner could even rotate the turret directly forward and transfer firing control of the guns to the pilot. Kind of. Pointed fully forward, the guns would actually be pointed 19 degrees up from horizontal, and the pilot didn't even have a gun sight, because why would he need one? That was why he had a gunner. On the 11th of August, 1937, the first prototype, K-8310, took off on its maiden flight. The type had also just received the name Defiant, which is a pretty cool name. Hawker's submission, which was known as the Hotspur, looked like a Typhoon with a turret in the back. The concept was the same, and even the turret was the same Boulton-Paul model. Although Hawker did give the pilot something to shoot, even though it was only one 303-inch Vickers machine gun mounted in the nose. Hawker's entry was a year late, partly because they were pretty busy with the Hurricane, even though they did use some Hurricane parts in the Hotspur. It did fly in June 1938, but after a wheels-up landing damaged the one prototype, it was decided to forget about fixing it. The Defiant was already well ahead, and again, Hawker was busy with the Hurricane. The aircraft name Hotspur would reappear in World War II in the General Aircraft Training Glider of the same name. In April 1937, production orders for 87 Defiants were received by Boulton-Paul. But development was slow. There were already requests coming in for changes that would result in the Mark II. The Mark II would add a pressurized fuel system and larger fuel tanks, a bigger rudder, and a deeper radiator and a modified engine, mounting, and elongated cowling in order to accommodate the new Merlin 20. Boulton-Paul was also building the Blackburn Rock under contract, which was the Fleet Air Arms turret fighter. So fine, Boulton-Paul would have the expertise in building turret fighters, but still, this was a lot going on while trying to ramp up production. And the result was delays in getting the Defiant into service. In fact, only 3 Defiants had reached the RAF by the start of the war, and these were actually still in trials. But maybe that was a good thing. Because it was becoming clear during trials that maybe the Defiant was great for destroying unescorted bombers, but that it was very vulnerable to enemy fighters. The best that it could do, if jumped, was to fly in a protective circle, with the turrets covering each other. It seems that the RAF realized that they had a problem. They even launched a deception campaign, stating that the Defiant had, in fact, 21 guns. Yes, 4 in the turret, but also 14, 7 in each wing, and 3 cannon in the nose. Maybe they should have included a GAU-19 gun too. Oh yeah, it hadn't been developed yet. But seriously, I wonder how long they thought that this ruse was going to last. In October 1939, RAF number 264 Squadron was designated to operate the Defiant. The first operational sortie of the Defiant occurred on the 12th of May, 1940. A flight of 6 Defiants flew with 6 Spitfires of 66 Squadron on a patrol over the English Channel to the coastline in the vicinity of The Hague, Netherlands. Does anybody already see a problem? Turret fighters being assigned Classic Fighter Escort would seem to indicate a lack of confidence in the concept. But during this flight, a Ju-88 that had been attacking shipping was shot down. Well, maybe things wouldn't be too bad after all. The next day's patrol was a repeat performance of the first. This time, things looked even better. The Defiants claimed 4 Junkers Ju-88 Stuka dive bombers shot down. Well. I guess the naysayers about the turret fighter can go fly a kite, right? No. The formation was then jumped by a flight of Bf-109Es. They performed a head-on attack, weren't bothered at all by the fictitious guns and cannons in the nose, and shot down 5 of the 6 Defiants. This even in spite of the 6 escorting Spitfires. One problem was communication. The radio antenna was on the bottom of the Defiant, and sometimes the escorting fighters above could not receive their transmissions. Well, naysayers, maybe you have a point. But then again, during the evacuation of Dunkirk, things looked up again. On May 27, 264 Squadron claimed 3 HE-111s shot down and 2 damaged. The next day, 10 Defiants were jumped by about 30 Bf-109s. This looks bad. But the Defiants turned into their defensive circle and claimed 6 109s for the loss of 3 of their own. Their best day was the 29th of May, when the squadron claimed 37 kills in 2 sorties. These were Ju-88 Stukas, mostly swatted down as they came out of their dives. They were also able to knock down 9 Bf-110 twin-engine Gestorers and another 8 Bf-109s and a Ju-88. Remember I said that the Defiant resembled the Hurricane? Well, at least in the beginning, this was a costly mistake that Luftwaffe fighter pilots made. They'd be sweeping down on what they thought was the unsuspecting tail of a careless hurricane, and then be totally surprised by a concentrated stream of 4 303s pouring into their face. But pretty quickly they learned the difference in silhouettes and also changed tactics. The Defiant had the same engine as a Hurry or a Spit, but the extra weight of the turret and the second bloke. And so it was not as maneuverable or fast. Luftwaffe fighter pilots could work around to attack from below or dead ahead, where the turret guns could not bear and offered no defense at all, and losses began to mount. When things went wrong for a Defiant, they went really wrong for the poor guy in the turret. You see, there wasn't room for him to wear a parachute. Okay, now that was the case for other gunners too. But in the bombers, a parachute pack could be stored outside of the turret. When things went bad, he could get out of the turret, strap on the pack, and then get out of the stricken airplane. In the Defiant, the outside of the turret was outside, where it was windy and a long way down. So, to avoid it being a suicide-type mission, the RAF had to develop a flying suit for the guy that had the parachute built in. The answer was designed by the Gregory Quilter Parachute Company. It was an all-in-one garment that contained both the parachute and the harness, and a life preserver in the collar. The parasuit weighed only 23 pounds, and the built-in parachute was only 1.5 inches thick. Officially, it was called the GQ parasuit, but the crews called it the suit with a chute and the rhino suit. You gotta check out the pic on the Patreon page. It honestly looks like a toddler wearing overalls who has just loaded his diaper. But the thing did work, as was proven by Pilot Officer Cyril Charles Ellery of number 264 Squadron, after he was forced to bail out of his Defiant turret at 15,000 feet after it had broken up in flight. There was even a special badge for successfully bailing out using the GQ parachute, just like the Caterpillar Club for those who had been saved by conventional parachute. Are you liking this episode? If you do, why not give me a good review or share me with a friend? The more listeners, the better. To avoid having to use their parachutes, Defiant crews continued to use the defensive circle when jumped, covering each other's tails as they descended until no enemy fighter could get below them. Initially, the tally looked not terrible, with 48 claims for the cost of 14 Defiants. It was actually more like 1-for-1. The multiple gunners involved had put in multiple claims for the same aircraft shot down. Defiants tried their best during the Battle of Britain. On August 24th, 9 Defiants from 264 Squadron took off from Manston to intercept an incoming German formation. During the battle that followed, they claimed 3 Ju-88s and 1 Bf-109 destroyed, although 2 Defiants were lost. Later that day, while 7 Defiants were refueling, another group of enemy bombers appeared. The squadron quickly took off to engage, shooting down 3 Ju-88s and 2 Bf-109Es, with 1 Defiant lost and another damaged in the action. On August 26, the squadron intercepted a group of 12 Dornier Do-17 bombers over northeastern Kent, but soon came under attack from a large formation of Bf-109s. The squadron lost 3 Defiants, 2 of them to Luftwaffe ace Hauptmann Gunther Lutzow of JG-3. Despite the losses, the Defiant crews claimed 6 Do-17s and 1 Bf-109 destroyed. Among the day's most notable actions was the crew of Flight Sergeant E.R. Thorne, the pilot, and F.J. Barker, air gunner, who accounted for 3 victories. They downed 2 Do-17s before their Defiant was set ablaze by a Bf-109. Even as their aircraft burned, they managed to shoot down the attacking fighter and then made a forced landing. Both men were awarded a bar to their Distinguished Flying Medal for their bravery. 28th of August was a bad day. 264 Squadron lost 5 aircraft with 9 crew killed. The writing was on the wall, and the Defiant was transferred to night operations only. As a night fighter, Defiants initially lacked any interception radar and relied on ground-based searchlights illuminating attacking bombers for them to pursue. Things were improved with the addition of Defiant Mark II models fitted with the Airborne Interception Mark IV radar and an upgraded Merlin 20 engine. 264 Squadron was joined by 96, 151, and 262 Squadrons for night fighting duties. Night fighting Defiants attacked from below in a manner that we associate with the German Schragemusik, although they would usually fire from slightly ahead or to one side rather than from directly underneath. As the nighttime blitz tapered off and more effective night fighters in the guise of bow fighters and mosquitoes joined the fight, the Defiants were withdrawn. In 1942, the plan for an upgraded Defiant was dropped. The Defiant was a dead end. Although the turret fighter concept didn't pan out, and you'd think that the aircraft would have a very limited production run, but no, they built around 1,064 of them. And they served with the air forces of Australia, Canada, and Poland, as well as the RAF. And they weren't done yet. Yes, you would imagine that they would be relegated to training-type roles, and that's true. They were especially useful for gunnery training and target towing, but one slightly sexier type role that Defiants occupied for a time was in the realm of airborne electronic countermeasure systems, especially against the German radar system known as Freya. This was an early warning system that could detect inbound Allied raids at up to 160 kilometers. Fooling Freya was definitely a goal of the RAF in protecting its raids headed towards the continent. The first device that Defiants carried was known as Moonshine. Moonshine worked by retransmitting Freya's radar signals to create the illusion of large enemy formations. Since each moonshine unit covered only a portion of the Freya's radar frequency range, a group of 8 Defiants was needed to generate the radar signature of more than 100 aircraft. Because this deception required tight formation flying, it could only be carried out in daylight. But it would draw German fighters towards the fake formation and divert attention away from the real British bomber force operating elsewhere. It was notably used in support of the Dieppe raid. Defiants also carried Mandrel, which was a radar noise-generating jammer that basically worked by drowning out the signals that Freya listens for. 9 Defiants could create a 200-mile, that's 320-kilometer gap in the Germans' radar coverage, allowing raids to slip through in the confusion. Defiants played this role until 1943, when again it began to be replaced by Beaufighters, which, being bigger, twin-engined aircraft, could carry more electronic equipment and had longer range. Defiants were also used in air-sea rescue units, carrying a pair of underwing pods that each contained 2 M-type dinghies, which were small one-man rescue rafts. They performed this service for about 6 months until being replaced. One last job for the Defiant was for testing ejection seats. 1 each was sent to the R. Malcolm Company and Martin Baker. Early ejection seats to be tested were installed in the former turret's position. On the 11th of May, 1945, Martin Baker used Defiant DR-944 to test fire their very first ejection seat. There is only one surviving Defiant. N1671 is on static display as a night fighter at the Royal Air Force Museum, Cosford in Shropshire. A full-scale replica Defiant is on display at the Kent Battle of Britain Museum, fittingly painted up in the colors of, yeah, you guessed it, 264 Squadron that I have mentioned so much today. It was built by an ex-Boulton Paul engineer and his team at the Boulton Paul Heritage Society. So when I started working on this episode, I figured that it would be a story of completely misguided thinking and utter failure. And although the Defiant didn't live up to its original promise, it did defiantly hold the line and take on new roles for which it hadn't been designed, and did yeoman service, doing jobs until more capable machines came online. And sometimes you don't need a star to hog all the glory. Sometimes you just need a team player to keep grinding away in the background to allow the stars to shine and bring about victory. I hope you've enjoyed this episode about a lesser known and dead-end concept aircraft. I guess I'll have to do a more popular one soon. What do you think? Thanks again to all who support the podcast through Patreon. I appreciate it more than you know. You can check out the photos of what we've been talking about on the Patreon page. These are available to all. Why not join Patreon? There's a free option to join. And if you can't, why not just leave me a review on wherever you're listening? Until next time.